Ah, the buzz on Maggie. So many words I can say about this show. When I was doing my top 10 worst cartoons of the 2000s, this show was easily a candidate. In fact, it was actually number 10 on the list until like the last minute. Yeah, on my top 10 list, I actually record and have number 10 edited last because that's actually the number that's most prone to changing since there are usually so many candidates. I eventually went with Coconut Fred since it was so blatantly a ripoff of SpongeBob and extremely shameless about it. I mean, look at this thing. It just screams, OC, do not steal. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe The Buzz and Maggie is the worst of the two shows. Let's talk about Originality. Originality is kind of like a unicorn. You see, it's this mythical thing that doesn't actually exist. You probably heard that there's nothing new under the sun, but we have to go a little bit beyond that. The human mind actually is not capable of coming up with things whole cloth. What creativity is, when you break it down and analyze it logically, is the mixing of bits and pieces of other things. For example, a unicorn is a horse with a horn on its head. These are both elements that we can see and observe in the real world to create this fictional creature. There's actually plenty of evidence that what we know of as a unicorn comes from ancient people misunderstanding what a rhinoceros is. It was often described as a steed. And when your frame of reference for a steed is a horse, it becomes much easier to imagine than what a rhinoceros actually is. And all of the myths and the abilities around the unicorn tend to be based on desires that, once again, did not come whole cloth. This is why when you're a writer or a creative of any kind, you're told to read a lot. You should actually go beyond that and experience all media, and have more actual real-life experiences. If you do not do this, you will not be a very good writer. My personal inspirations lie in everything from cartoons like Recess to video games like Silent Hill or Finding Paradise to films like Synecdoche, New York, and a lot of the traveling that I've done in my youth. However, there's obviously a limit. If you're just getting your inspiration from a single place, like Coconut Fred, that tends to be plagiarism. Creativity is the mixing of ideas, changing them up, not just taking them. And then there's the problem when the ideas don't mix at all. Coconut Fred is one of the worst things that can happen when you're not being creative at all. The buzz on Maggie is probably one of the worst things that can happen when you actually have a creative idea and seek that mythical originality. Because The Buzz on Maggie actually has one of the most original ideas that I've ever seen in a cartoon. You know the typical Disney teen sitcom? It's usually aimed at girls and full of school drama. You've probably seen one or two. They're all one and the same for the most part. They tend to go through the same plots, have the same character types. A couple of them may have twists here and there. Lizzie McGuire had an animated alter ego, Hannah Montana had a celebrity alter ego, or vice versa, and That's So Raven had peeks into the future. But they did tend to deal with the same plots and the same drama, and the ones that I just mentioned are the creative standouts in this genre. So how do you bring some fresh air to these tired and lifeless cliches? How do you do something that's never been done before? I know! Let's make all of these teen girls bugs. Actually, I know, let's make them flies. Literally the most disgusting animal on the planet. And that's not just my opinion either. I don't know if they still do this, but Animal Planet did run these top 10 lists of animals a while back, like the most dangerous animals, and they had a list of the top 10 most disgusting animals. And number 1 was the common household fly. Everything about flies are disgusting. They carry bacteria, they vomit on their food to digest it, but the most gross thing about them is that they like to put their filthy feet on your food. And you don't know where those things have been. Actually, you might, since they love to eat shit. Flies are one of the biggest culprits of cross-contamination. I bring this stuff up because pretty much all of what I just mentioned actually happens on The Buzz on Maggie. The Buzz on Maggie is a teen school sitcom aimed at girls where the main characters are bugs that act like realistic bugs at the most disgusting of times, in the most disgusting of ways. Like, they mention that all of their food is rotten and moldy every time that it comes up.
These spoiled eggs are delicious, Mom. They're not just festering, they're not just rancid, they're festering and rancid.
What I'm saying is that I don't see the appeal. I don't know who the audience for this show is supposed to be. And maybe that's why it only lasted one season and barely that with only 21 episodes. Let's talk about premise. When you're doing a show, your premise can be whatever you want. A school where kids learn magic? Go right ahead. Random guy lost in a day that keeps repeating itself? Sure, you don't even have to explain why. A premise is something that's a given, and it doesn't have to be bound by our reality either. It can be anything. However, there are two rules to this quote-unquote get out of jail free card. Rule 1 is that you only get one. In a world with magic, magic has to be the explanation for any strange thing that happens. But more pertinent to our case here is the other rule. The premise has to be used to boost the plot. In the best case scenario, the plots would not work without the premise. That's how you know that the premise is working well. And in a way, the premise of the show does affect the plots. You know the typical don't change for popularity moral that you find in the typical teen drama? Well, in The Buzz on Maggie, the popular kid tries to make everyone ladybugs. And of course, the ladybug wants the flies to stop barfing on their food to digest it, which we actually get to see them do when they stand up for their individuality. Isn't nature beautiful? In all seriousness, not only does the premise not help support the plots, it actively attacks any appeal that the show otherwise would have had. If this show starred humans, it'd be boring and bland, probably. But because everyone is bugs, it's gross and disgusting, and aimed at an audience that typically does not want gross and disgusting. Also, spitting up on your food to digest it is probably something that people shouldn't be doing. I don't get why you're portraying this in a positive light. Yeah, the concept kind of attacks any lessons that it tries to tell. The character design is also pretty terrible and unappealing as well. Because they're flies, every single character's eyes are too consistently far apart. It looks awkward and manages to fall into the uncanny valley. It's like, just push these fucking things together! When you're anthropomorphizing animals, one thing that you tend to need to keep consistent is the face. It needs to be more reminiscent of humanity. It needs something that humans can recognize, unless it's like a one-off joke. Animals with eyes on the side of their heads, like flies or even chameleons, I don't think they could really work as the main characters of a show like this. They're better used for one-off gags. Not to mention that it's very hard to convey their face in a 2D space, which is why they look like this. The small proportioned bodies and rubber hose arms, complete with gloves on every hand, kinda looks lazy in this modern day and age. There's a reason that this look went out of style, except for cartoons that have been around since they were popular. But maybe I'm wrong, because the show was nominated for an Annie Award for its character design. Seriously though, cartoon award shows are like the worst. Like, the worst. They nominate the weirdest, stupidest shit, and I have no idea why. I will admit the few humans that we do see do look stylized really well. If this show did star humans in the human world and completely abandon its premise, it would honestly be a much better show. And that's really, really sad. I don't think that I've ever seen a premise used this badly before. I mean, I've seen premises underused before, but I've never seen one that actively attacked the quality of the show. Like, imagine taking Harry Potter and it being better without any magic whatsoever, or Groundhog Day being better without the Groundhog Day loop, or Star Wars being better taking place here and now without the Force, or Groundhog Day being better without the Groundhog Day loop. It really must be an interesting experience when you learn that by making your creation more trite and more cliche, it would be better. But I will give it this, the theme song was honest when it said that the show was original. However, that's more than I could say about the honesty of some of the other lyrics. And that's probably the biggest lie of them all. If you look past the gross out that the show often shoves in your face, every single plot has been done before. Kids sneaking into an R-rated movie, babysitting a kid that turns out to be more than you thought it would be, hosting a slumber party when the parents are away. Wow, that is very cliche. What's their excuse for this? I don't even try. Well, at least they're honest about that. There is a lyric of this theme song that is missing though, and that is that Maggie is one of the most awful characters that I've ever come across. I know that she's a teenager and a little bit of acting out is typical in teenage characters. However, every single episode, every single one, she just gets a little bit more terrible. I mean, it starts out small with things like her disobeying her parents and going into an R-rated movie. That's typical stuff. But very, very quickly, it goes downhill. And it goes downhill fast. In one episode, Maggie and her friend Raina, who is equally as awful, get the smart kids in class to do all the work on an assignment. At the same time, they go out to spend the money ahead of time that her father would have given her if she had passed. In another episode, she pretends to have a crush on a stink bug to get into a fancy lodge.
Show some pity, for bug's sake!
Another episode, she ends up aggravating a swarm of locusts. Another episode, she sells kits that help students pretend they're sick. But all of these are small maggot-infested potatoes next to how Maggie treats her younger siblings. How about instead of taking care of your baby sister, you take her to the carnival, where you end up losing her because she kept screwing up your attempts to play a vapid game. Maybe, I don't know, get jealous of her acting career and think that she's conspiring against you because she didn't speak on your cue because she's a baby. Luckily for the baby, she only appears in like 10% of the episodes. Like in the other 90%, they just forget that she's even a character and don't put her in the episode at all. Then there's Puper. You feel so bad for this kid watching this show. In the Halloween episode, Maggie takes Puper to the human world in another vapid attempt to prove herself, despite him having the very real chance of getting squished. In the episode Bug Sitting, she basically throws him in the closet because she was babysitting some other bugs. And please tell me, why is Maggie asked to babysit so goddamn much? It's like every single episode. And I mean like every episode. Maggie can't do her plans because she needs to babysit this kid or that kid. This gets so bad that in one case, she's prevented from babysitting because she has to babysit, even though she's absolutely terrible at it. Her parents know that she's terrible at this, and she even has an older sibling. Why isn't he doing any of the babysitting? It is just so contrived. Maggie's continually asked to babysit these kids, even though she has proved time and time again that she is not responsible, and she should be the last person in charge of these kids. The parents should hire a babysitter for her.
Don't try to understand.
Don't worry, I've given up a long time ago. But seriously, sometimes unreliable? No, I wouldn't ask Maggie to ask paint dry, because she'd probably find a way to turn it radioactive. There is nothing redeeming about her. I can't think of one thing. When she's not acting like totally awful, she's acting as cliche as can be. I mean, sometimes she fixes what she broke, sometimes, but she does nothing for anyone without an ulterior motive. And half of the time, when everything goes crumbling down, the episode just ends. Whenever she's in the moral right, it's usually because the characters around her are worse. Like when she wanted to raise on her allowance, and her parents got replacement kids. This is something that actually happened, which is not a good look at all. And it's not like the other characters are standouts either. Every single one of them is very cliche. We have the cliche gross lunch lady, the cliche corrupt principal, the cliche mean girl popular girl. If I want to find some redeeming values about the show itself, I guess the production values of the show are decent. Character design notwithstanding, it's animated well and they built an interesting world out of garbage. And they have some high-name voice actors. The problem is that these high-name voice actors have absolutely no direction. So when Cree Summers speaks, I don't hear Raina. I hear Cree Summers. I don't hear Maggie's father. I hear Brian Doyle Murray. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. But it seems like they just wanted to have famous voice actors just for the sake of it. The biggest issue with the show is that it had a lot of ideas, but at no point did they ever stop and ask, are these ideas good? Because when you're creating something, you're gonna have plenty of ideas. And a lot of them you have to set aside and just say, no, they wouldn't work. They would detract from the overall project. They didn't ask, why are we making this shows based on flies? Does telling a teen girl drama in a world of insects really connect to the audience that we're going for? Because with the slightest scrutiny, I can guarantee that the answer is no. So, was I wrong before? Or was I wrong that I was wrong? What I mean was, is Coconut Fred worse than this show still? Honestly, it's kind of an apples to oranges comparison. They're both pretty terrible, but literally in the opposite way. Coconut Fred was a show that had no ideas whatsoever, but The Buzz on Maggie is a show that only had bad ideas. I guess it depends on your mood. I'll give the show an A for effort, I guess, but an F on the grade that actually matters, because this show is awful.